All right, so compare this shadow, which is a drop shadow that the dogs have right now. So here, this one. Remove it with this one. Which one gives you the more realistic feel?
The second one.
Second one, right?
Yeah.
And again, that's for a number of reasons. The drop shadow implies that the light source is at the front and is basically shining towards the object, and the shadow is falling at the back. But based on the composition of your image, your light source, which is the sun, looks like it's directly ahead or directly above, and therefore your shadow should be falling down on the ground, not back of the object. Okay? So let's try and do something similar for the man here. So again, we have a drop shadow that just drops the shadow towards the back. And sometimes, depending on what you're doing, you can use multiple shadows. So you can use a shadow like I did here, which is a whole new layer. And you can use a drop shadow to throw it back, because again, sometimes you have multiple light sources and you will have multiple shadows being created. So it's up to you to look at the composition of your image and figure out what's going to work best. But for this one, I'm going to take off that drop shadow and attempt to build the shadow again using just the object. So the first thing I want to do is duplicate the object or the layer, which is layer 2. I can right click on it. I'm going to show you a different way to duplicate this time, and duplicate layer. All right. It asks you to give you a name. Let's type layer 2 shadow. So at this point, you should have two ways to duplicate your layers, right? One way is to drag it down to the create new layer button on the layers panel. The other way is to right click on the layer and select duplicate. All right. Then I'm simply going to drag. I'm going to hold shift and click from the top here and drag so that I get him essentially cast like a shadow. Right? It's not perfect again. I'm going to manipulate it a bit, pressing Control on my keyboard and skewing it a bit so that we can get the shadow to fall the way that we want. So I can make it fall a little more to the right, a little more to the left. In this case, I want it falling sort of similar to the way the dog shadows falling, so leaning slightly to the left a bit. Right? Gonna move it up because remember the shadow typically touches the object, so we want the tips of his foot to at least be touching the areas that are resting on the ground. We want them to be connecting to the shadow. All right. I'm gonna press Control again and make another minor tweak here. Okay, no, that's gonna be overkill. So I'll leave it like this for now. What's the next step in creating that shadow? Anybody can tell me?
The color overlay.
Right, so we give it a color overlay. Let's drop that effect. And let me show you another way we can give it a color overlay, right? But not a color overlay, but a fill. So a color overlay is really an effect, but I can select the layer. If I press Control and click on the little thumbnail eye area here, right? It will select the pixels that make up that layer for me. So Control and click. Everybody see the matching ants? And then I can go Edit, Fill, and let's fill it with black. So content, we're gonna fill it with black. Okay. All right. Notice I have no color overlay here. It's actually a destructive editing technique, meaning we painted over all of the pixels that looked like the man before, and they're now just black pixels. All right. So we've actually destroyed it, but it's just to create a shadow. So it's a little consequence right now. Okay. Gonna deselect, Control D to remove the selection. And then what's the next step? Anybody can tell me?
The opacity.
The opacity, but first I want to drop the shadow to below the object. Right now it's above the object. I want to drop it to below the object so that it's not cast over the object. Everybody see the difference? It was overissued slightly.
Yes, sir.
Right? Let's try to align it a little better than that. Right? And then we drop the opacity. Let's say 50. Yeah. And The shadow, again, with an opacity of 50 will never be that sharp on the edges or that crisp. So we're going to blur it a little bit to get it to look more fuzzy or more like a shadow. Again, we can just apply Gaussian blur filter. Gaussian blur was the last filter we used, so just click it here. It should apply to the very same settings as the dogs. And there we have our shadow. Now I can go ahead and do any little tweaking that I need. Sorry, 1 second, yeah. So, sorry, my system running just a little bit slow, waiting for it to catch up. All right. Right, we can tweak it together just the way that we need it to go. And of course, we can even add the drop shadow to add a little bit more effects, maybe not so far. So we're gonna drop the distance a bit. So I'm gonna make it fall a little bit to the back. I'm gonna drop the distance and increase the size so it's a little bit more fuzzy, less spread. And then I'm going to select those layers, the object and its shadow, right? So that's layer 2 and layer 2 shadow. I can select both of them by first clicking on the first layer, the layers panel, and then pressing Control or Shift. Shift will select multiple layers. So if you select the first layer and you hold Shift, it will select all of the layers in between all the way up to the last one. If you press Control, then you can select individual layers, and then we can link them. We don't really have to group them. This icon here looks like a chain link right at the very beginning on the toolbar, the bottom of your layers panel. Will link your layers so that they are moved together. All right, you don't have to select both of them to move them together. So when you move one, both of them moves, and then you place your object at the appropriate locations. Let's link the dogs. Click on the first dog layer, press Control, click on its shadow, and then we can link them. All right, and then we can move them as one single object and put them where they're supposed to be relative to our object. Everybody get that?
Yes, sir.
So, shadow, come on. All right. So one of the things that you should always keep in mind is shadows tend to be dead giveaways when you're editing images. So you always want to make sure that your shadows are on point, right? It can take a little bit of time. It looks like it's inconsequential. It's really just an area of black, all right? But it can be a dead giveaway if an image was edited or if it's actually a realistic photo. All right. I'm assuming that everybody got the hang of the homework. Did anybody else send anything else for me to look at?
I say it for you know.
You saying it now? All right. Well, I'll look out for it in a bit. Does anybody have any questions relating to the homework using your selection tools, isolating an object?
I have
Good
none.
with that?
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
All right. Let me close up this one. We're gonna take it a little step further today, right? And I'm sure you guys realize that this, let's save this, that the techniques that we've been using so far, using the selection tools like the polygonal lasso and copying the object out of it, it's not destructive if we copy it, but the method of actually generating our object is actually a destructive method. Do you guys realize that? Let me pull up one of the previous ones. There. All right. So for instance, on this one, if we remove all of the other layers, this fish that we isolated here, right? Our design method, sorry, was not destructive because we still have the original layer here, the layer 1, that we can get back the original pixels from, right? But if we were to create another object, another document, for instance, and drag that layer that we isolated onto the new document, let me just demonstrate how we'll do that. So if you want to combine multiple objects into a single document, create a new document now. Gonna go with 8.5 by 1172. All right. If I wanted to move the isolated fish onto that other document, the easiest way I could do it was to click on the object, right, and drag it over onto the other document and release it. That way I have the object on a new document. So blank background layer and a new layer one showing our object. Yeah. But this is actually a destructive edit. In other words, if you wanted to modify it to show a little bit of the background, none of the pixels are actually available. We'd have to go back to the original document, right, and make that selection all over again, right? Can anybody tell me a method that we can use, a non-destructive method that we can use to isolate the fish, right, but keep it non-destructive? We looked at it briefly in the last class. Anybody can remember what it is?
So using the lasso?
Well, you can start with the lasso, yes, to make your selection. So I'm gonna make my selection by using the existing selection, the fish, and just make it invisible. So that's my selection here. Let's assume that this is it, all right? I used the lasso, I made my selection on this fish. Now I want to isolate it without destroying the pixels around it. How can I do that?
Rasterizing.
Rasterizing is destructive. Rasterizing actually converts a vector or a smart object into a raster layer. And in that case, what we have is a rasterized object. So we don't even have the option to rasterize. You see, it's disabled because it's already rasterized. What can we do? We can do a few things. The first thing we can do, right, is, well, let's take the rasterize step. It's not able to rasterize right now because it's a pixel-based object. However, we can convert it to a smart object. Everybody see the option here, convert to smart object. And that will actually convert the pixels into a special type of layer called a smart object, where we would not be able to, let me just, I'm gonna save selection, save selection, and let's just call it fish. I'm gonna do that so I can get it back quickly later, all right? Okay. Now, a smart object, as I was explaining, is a special type of object that can hold bitmap, vector, and other data inside of it, but it will not allow you to edit it directly. So for instance, if I wanted to take an eraser, right, and I were to attempt to use eraser on that object or that layer, notice I no longer have the option, right? If I rasterize that layer, meaning convert it from a smart object to a raster layer, see rasterized layer, it's now converted back to the pixels like it was, and I can pass my eraser on it and erase pieces of it. But one way we can ensure that we do not destroy our pixels is by converting our objects, our layers, to smart objects, right? Convert to smart object. The second thing that we want to do, if we convert it to a smart object now, how are we going to copy the object of it? So just look at the timer there. We have less than 1 minute. So what I'm gonna do is we're gonna take a quick break here. Let me take a print screen of the guys who are at class now. And we're gonna come back, guys, in 5 minutes and continue our discussion, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Might be like more like
Okay.
6 because we have to wait for the recording to convert, but I'll send the link as soon as we get back. I'll see you guys in a bit.
Okay.